a pretty intensive day. The boot camp itself begins pretty early in the morning. We usually go out, and the chefs don't know this when they're coming, but we actually will go out and harvest the food that we're cooking for that day, including taking the life of an animal.
People have professional conferences all the time, and the American Culinary Federation has its conferences, and there are the various sections, and you can talk about topics, but you don't get a diversity of personnel at these things. The professionals that attend the professional conferences, you don't have the food writers, you don't have the market owner, you don't have the fishermen necessarily. So these events are community-based, and they have the potential to really involve a diversity of people that have just as much to say about what's going on than perhaps a professional does.
A lot of consumers, because they've been so disconnected from the true process of where their food comes from, that if they see a tomato, they'll say, well, that was grown on a farm and it's on my table. Isn't that farm to table? There's a difference between a tomato that was picked green weeks before it turned ripe, gassed with nitrogen, and shipped thousands of miles to get to that final destination, where your dollar that was spent on that tomato touches all those different expenses along the way, or getting a tomato that was picked ripe by a farmer not so far from here, really nice and ripe, and then when you go to a farmer's market or you go to a retailer that has great relationships, the majority of your dollar is actually going to the farmer. So when we look at the investment that we make in our food, and that when farm to table means that it's actually you're buying from a neighbor, your dollar stays in your community and you have more economic activity as a result of that, richer relationships. All of those things make the food more delicious.
We were just talking about that outside, that, why don't more people look for Lake Meadow Naturals or make the effort to find Palmetto Creek or Waterkiss Farm? And I think the more they can see how accessible it is, I don't think people were ever aware of how accessible all these great ingredients are here. I mean, I've been in D.C., in San Francisco, those communities, and New York too. I think it's more competitive in the bigger markets. I think here we realized that in order for all of us to be successful, we needed to share. I don't think we could be as successful if we didn't collaborate. It's a necessity here because we've had to change the food scene, and it's been a lot of work. So you have to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you and that can help you be more successful.
The perception that we're not a culinary destination has to do with the fact that we're primarily a tourist state, and there are all these attractions for tourists to come visit here. So there's this perception that it's always mass quantities, and it's not a thoughtful approach to food, say. But that's clearly changing. The East End Market is a great example of that. The fact that the James Beard Foundation will be here next month announcing their nominees for next year is a huge thing, and they could have gone anywhere else, but they chose here. So that if they believe it, I mean, how could the rest of the country know?